The plot is thickening, and we have new questions about what happened inside this South Carolina home. This video per WSOC TV. This man is a pastor's son who's accused of holding 4 people captive inside the basement of his house over the span of a decade. And we're now learning about a man allegedly trapped in that house, what his sister is saying about the years she searched for him. And we have a potential bombshell in this case, as a woman seen kissing the suspect in pictures seems to have been arrested on the same day as the suspect at the same house. We have a lot to unpack. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Imagine searching for a loved one for years, not knowing where they went, filing a missing persons report even, and nothing comes up until you find out that they were allegedly held against their will inside of a house in the town where you live. That is the reality, reportedly, for a woman in Lancaster, South Carolina, who says that her brother is one of the 4 people held captive inside a house there. I'll get more to what she had to say in just a moment. Now, a woman told WSOC TV that her brother is one of the people who is trapped inside this house. She said that she had been searching for her brother for years and she couldn't find him. She even filed a missing persons report. She says he has a developmental disability, but he lived on his own until a few years ago when he disappeared. She said when she was reunited with him after Birchfield was arrested, she said her brother looked to weigh about 70 pounds less. Certainly what we know thus far, the allegations, they're horrific. Allegations that 4 people were held against their will, physically abused inside this house about an hour south of Charlotte in the small town of Lancaster, South Carolina. This again video per WSOC TV. Now, 2 of them, 2 alleged victims, reportedly a husband and wife. The 2 others were allegedly romantically involved with the man who is now facing more than a dozen charges in this case. We've learned that there may be more than one person facing charges who lived in this home, and they may be someone who is dating the suspect, Donnie Ray Birchfield. Now, I'll break down what we know at this point about whether the failure to report abuse charge that woman is facing is connected to the house of horror that Birchfield is accused of creating in his home in just a moment. But to understand that, we really have to get into the timeline of what we know at this point. A lot of information coming from law enforcement, as well as arrest warrants that were obtained by the local media outlet, the Post and Courier. So this story starts on July 25th, when police in Lancaster, South Carolina, again about an hour south of Charlotte, got a call about an unattended death inside Birchfield's home. Now, you can see in the WSOC TV video that it looks like a very average home in a very average neighborhood in this community. According to the warrants that were obtained by the Post and Courier, police determined that the woman who they responded to for this unattended death, that she had actually died a day prior to them being called to Birchfield's home. They say there was also evidence that the victim was physically denied food, water, and medical treatment. This was just the beginning, though, of what law enforcement said they found inside Birchfield's home. They said there were 3 other people there, and police say they were allegedly being held captive by this man. Now, publicly, we know that Birchfield is the son of a prominent Baptist minister in this small town. And we also found several pictures of Birchfield on social media of him and his family. He seems like he was a really big fan of pro wrestling. He's at a lot of those events. Very normal stuff on social media. Now, the newspaper reports, as far as what was going on inside the house, that the husband of the woman who died was also being held captive along with 2 women who Birchfield was romantically involved with. Now, police said that Birchfield was the sole provider of the husband and wife, and it's unclear how he knew them. Now, a woman told WSOC TV that her brother is one of the people who is trapped inside this house. She said that she had been searching for her brother for years and she couldn't find him. She even filed a missing persons report. She says he has a developmental disability, but he lived on his own until a few years ago when he disappeared. She said when she was reunited with him after Birchfield was arrested, she said her brother looked to weigh about 70 pounds less. Now, as far as the 2 women who were allegedly in some kind of romantic relationship with Birchfield, police say one was in the house since September of last year, the other since 2015. We are talking about a span of a decade, according to law enforcement. Now, we dove into this a little bit more, trying to figure out people who Donnie Ray Birchfield was allegedly connected to. And we found 2 Facebook accounts of women who have pictures with Birchfield, and they appear to be, at least at one point, romantically involved with him. There's one account of a woman with pictures of Birchfield that go back to roughly 2019. It appears she and Birchfield, they would go to a lot of pro wrestling events. Her most recent post, though, was of herself outside on September 19th of this year. It's a picture of her outside in a cemetery. Now, the other account appears to show a woman currently romantically involved with Birchfield. The woman posted a picture that appears to show Birchfield kissing her on the forehead on June 12th, about a month and a half before police responded to the house for the suspicious death. Now, it is unclear if either of these women are alleged victims of what Birchfield is accused of doing, but we did put their names into the South Carolina court database. And the woman with the most recent pictures of her kissing with Birchfield, they came back showing that she was arrested on August 1st. And the address listed for where this woman was arrested, the same house on Churchill Road in Lancaster, South Carolina, where Birchfield is accused of holding 4 people captive. Now, Birchfield was arrested at that same address, and according to court records, on the same day. The woman is facing a charge of abuse, failure to report abuse, neglect of vulnerable adults. According to online court records, she posted a $2,000 surety bond on August 11th. Now, Birchfield is facing 16 charges, including 2 counts of abuse of a vulnerable adult, 4 counts of false imprisonment, 2 counts of domestic violence, high and aggravated nature, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and 3 counts of exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He is being held on a $150,000 bond, and records show that his case was also filed on August 11th, the same date as the woman who, according to those records, was arrested at his house on the same day that he was. Now, I'm not naming that woman at this point because we just don't know enough about her and the circumstances surrounding her arrest. It's also unclear if law enforcement sees her as a victim in this case. We need to pause in this episode of On the Case and bring you a law and crime legal alert because there are allegations claiming that online apps DraftKings and FanDuel are engineered for addiction. These multi-billion-dollar companies allegedly continue to put profit over safety. Every free bet, every boosted parlay, and every small payout triggers a dopamine rush that creates dependency and turns harmless fun into a detrimental habit. They keep you hooked, chasing impossible wins, and trap you in a cycle that can lead to significant financial loss and ultimately damage mental health. Our legal sponsors are taking on the online gambling industry to potentially get compensation for all of those impacted. So if you or a loved one has suffered addiction, financial hardship, or mental health issues due to sports betting apps, visit gamblinglawsuit.com/OTC to take a short quiz and check your eligibility to file a claim. I did reach out to police in Lancaster, South Carolina to see if there was any information they could give me on this woman, and they told me they're not releasing more information for now on this case, but they are planning to do a release in conjunction with the South Carolina Attorney General's office, and they also said that it is still a very active investigation. Now, here's what we know about the alleged abuse that happened inside the home. These are more specifics. According to police, Birchfield kept the 4 people in the basement of the house, and they were only allowed to leave when he let them. Birchfield also controlled the victims' cell phones, stopping them from calling for help. He also allegedly controlled when victims would eat and use the bathroom. Physically, police say that Birchfield abused the victims, including strangling them. One woman allegedly told police that Birchfield threatened to kill her and her family, and that he knew how to get rid of a body from past experience. Then, since 2021, police allege that Birchfield used the couple's credit and debit cards, the husband and wife, to pay for at least $2,000 to buy items online from Walmart, 32 transactions, in fact, all for himself. He also allegedly nearly spent $12,000 of that couple's money over the first 8 months of this year to pay off multiple credit cards. We've learned that Birchfield is the son of a Baptist pastor in Lancaster. And again, he was a huge fan of pro wrestling, it seems. His social media shows him with several wrestlers. And I bring that up because this picture is sadly ironic when you see a chain around his neck. But what we're talking about, this isn't some gimmick or storyline. This is real life. Real accusations that he caused a lot of harm to the 4 people allegedly held captive inside his home. There is, though, at least one person who appears to some extent to be in his corner after this story's come to light. His sister posted on social media, quote, "Before you share or repost anything about my family, please stop and put yourself in our place. What if it were your son, your brother, or your friend being gossiped about and judged online? Spreading speculation, repeating unverified claims, and adding commentary only causes more harm. It's not helping anyone." Now again, it's true. We have not heard Birchfield's side to the story, and more questions seem to be piling up in the days since this story first came to light. And it's unclear if there's any chance that all of this is some big misunderstanding. It's also unclear how the woman in his home died. It's unclear how someone allegedly could be held captive for a decade, and for all of this to take place without someone reaching out about the victims. We do know that Donnie Birchfield could face more charges beyond what he's facing as we speak. Birchfield is facing a total of 16 charges. I reached out to his attorney and received this statement, quote, "My office is currently investigating this matter. My client maintains his innocence in this case, and it is important to remember that he is presumed innocent of these allegations. We look forward to litigating this case in the court system where facts, evidence, and the rule of law matter. We will have no further comment at this time." I also reached out to the attorney listed for the woman facing a charge who was arrested at Birchfield's home. We have yet to hear back at the time of this recording. Join us now to talk more about this is criminal defense attorney Sky Lazaro. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here on Law and Crime. Just such a shocking case with just the allegations that law enforcement has laid out thus far. What stands out to you about how this could play out when it comes to the court case and all the proceedings moving forward?
You know, it's really early in the case right now. Obviously, charges have just been filed and he's been arrested on the charges. His attorney, we saw, issued a statement maintaining his innocence. These cases are not always as clear-cut as maybe they initially seem in terms of, you know, when the defense starts putting together an investigation and, you know, essentially their take on what went on, you know, whether or not this was voluntary, at least to begin with, or came, you know, started out in a good place and here we ended up, you know, somewhere that is seemingly criminal, or at least allegedly criminal.
Right. Yeah, because I do think like the clear-cut part of it, because there are cases that I remember the story out of Cleveland where it was, you know, those women trapped in a house and then there was this, you know, kind of heroic rescue. And then there's other cases where they might have been in a relationship and people had seen them out and about. I'm not saying in specifics of this case, but it seems like sometimes it's not like, you know, the medieval times chained to a wall and it was just like that for 10 years. I mean, how does the prosecution and defense navigate that reality? And let's start with the prosecution side of it. How do you paint a picture that even if it started as voluntary, it went to a place that was criminal?
Really what the prosecution is going to have to do is be really good about laying out why these were vulnerable adults and how he essentially took advantage of them or kept them in the home for this period of time. They're alleging he used debit cards for personal expenses, those types of things. But these vulnerable adult cases really seem to turn on why were they vulnerable? You know, was there mental health problems? Was there some sort of disability? You know, was he taking disability checks from him? Was that, you know, the reason he was doing this? So I really think the prosecution is going to have to, you know, really piece together a case of controlled coercion or something along those lines where people couldn't leave because he was controlling their money. Something like that. Because I don't think this is a case where he kept them chained in, but these were also seemingly people who weren't given medical care that it sounds like needed it, at least from, you know, early reporting on the case. So I think they're going to have to really lay out, you know, what was wrong with these, or not wrong, but, you know, what ailments do these individuals have? How did he take advantage of them? How did he, you know, keep them trapped or contained in this home for 10 years?
Well, because that's the part of it as well, where I know through the woman who says it was her brother who was in the house, that she said that he was living independently on his own, but he had some sort of learning disability, which would make him a vulnerable adult, and thus the charge that we've seen there. But if this were to go to trial, and we know his attorney has said his client maintained his innocence to this point, how do you build testimony when it comes to someone who may not be able to testify on the stand because maybe they have a learning disability or some sort of mental ailment that would hurt their ability to testify in an open court?
That can come in through other witnesses. His sister, who's been looking, she knows his history. It can come in through medical expert testimony if they have people, these people assessed to say, okay, this is, what they have. If they were getting Social Security disability, things like that can all come in as it's not really even circumstantial evidence, but collateral evidence to support that this person was a vulnerable adult and could have been easily manipulated or controlled or somehow coerced. It doesn't sound like they were chained up and not allowed to leave. So I'm kind of assuming that some of what we might see in this is there was some financial control going on where he just didn't give them access. And, if this brother had been missing for a while, maybe this was a place to live where he had friends,
Well, and that's, thinking as a criminal defense attorney, because I know, and we received a statement from his attorney. I mean, that's not an easy job when you have someone who's accused of crimes like this, and definitely in a way where, I mean, you just read the headline and you're like, 10 years, how is that even possible? Mm-hmm. And then you're representing this person. We don't know. Part of this too is law enforcement isn't releasing much more than what we already have. So there's a little bit of evidence that we have, but there's still I feel like I have just so many questions that I would have for law enforcement when they're ready to speak more about it. But as a criminal defense attorney, and especially in a small community like this, everybody knows the story, everybody's seen the headlines. How do you approach this case to try and defend your client? I mean, if it's in this county, you would have to think it would be a really difficult place to try this case, knowing what the allegations are.
Right, and these are generally cases that are really sympathetic for juries. Your victims in these cases are extremely sympathetic most of the time, and they're tough cases from the defense side. But this is a small town, and I think they interviewed some of the neighbors that didn't seem to think anything was amiss or going wrong. And so, that to me, unless these people never saw the light of day and nobody had a clue that they were in the home, you'd think if the neighbors thought that this gentleman was exploiting them or controlling them or stealing their money or keeping them trapped there, that somebody would have said something. And maybe it does come out that they just nobody knew they were there and they were never allowed to leave the house. I think from a defense standpoint, I know he said his investigation is ongoing, which is, the best he can say right now. And they're probably going to have to do quite a bit of interviewing, but you hope to be able to piece together something that puts your client in a positive light where he was trying to help people. We see these sort of unsanctioned group homes all the time where, there'll be a sober living house or it'll be, some sort of other place for people who, have learning disabilities but can function pretty well on their own. But they'll live in a home, with a group of other people, and so hopefully he can, I think probably his best argument is, it started out as something like that and maybe he got carried away on the expenditures or got out of hand and it got to be more than he could handle medically, things along those lines. I mean, that's really the kind of case you've got to put together. Is it can't be they probably weren't there because we know they were there. So you have to have a better explanation.
You touched on this a little bit because he's facing these charges related to financial crimes, and they accuse him of spending $11,000 to pay off credit cards, using this couple who are considered vulnerable, 2 of the 4 people, the husband and wife, using their money, and then it was about like $2,000 in stuff that he bought at Walmart, which police said was just for himself. Those crimes in and of themselves, I would assume you'd be able to prove with some financial statements, and all of that. But when it comes to piecing together the entire picture for the prosecution and showing that this was not voluntary, they'll say that these were people being held against their will. How do those financial transactions factor in beyond just those financial charges that he's facing?
So I've had this case, or cases very similar to that, where I've defended individuals who were the caretaker for someone. And it went on for years and years and years. And there were the same similar allegations because the credit card was used to buy things. You know, my client said, look, she told us that, or he told us that we could, you know, so it was, you know, a gift, you know, things like that. I think there's always more to these. And look, this very well may be a case where he just kept people locked in the basement. I don't know that we know really what was going on, but in some of these vulnerable adult cases, what we do see are these long-standing relationships where they really did care for the people. You know, there was no other family around, and it wasn't until the person passed away or some other family member got involved that decided they wanted to be part of it that somebody goes to the police and makes a report. And so the financial transactions could very well be, you know, authorized, completely benign. You know, I think a lot of that is stuff that will, you know, need to be uncovered probably by the defense. And diving into this case is, you know, did he just take the debit card and go use it for his own use and not for the benefit of them, or purchase things at Walmart for them? Or, you know, did they okay it? And if they're vulnerable adults, were they capable of okaying it, you know, from a mental capacity?
Because I also wonder, there's just kind of this overall question for me with this story too, especially because I believe it's unclear for the couple how long it's that they were believed to be held against their will, according to the police. Two of the women, the romantic partners, one was in the house in September of last year, and then you have this person from 2015. And everybody's got different family situations. And it's sad in some cases that people can fall through the cracks, and we've seen it in a lot of ways. I'm sure in your work you've seen it as well. But how is it that someone could vanish for 10 years, be in this house, be allowed only with the help or with being allowed by the suspect, Donnie Birchfield, according to police? How do these cases happen? Because as shocking as it is, I feel like it's not the first time we've seen cases like this.
Sadly, I think this probably happens more than we realize. And how it happens, I think, is a tough question to answer. You know, everybody's family dynamics are different. I can say for myself, if my sister went missing, I would not just be like, oh, I wonder where she's at. You know, I'd probably go looking. Right. But, you know, everybody's different and everybody's dynamics are different, and life experiences are different. And unfortunately, you know, we have a society where there are people who will take advantage of people, you know, who are vulnerable. And I think unless somebody sees something, a neighbor sees something and says something, or, you know, that starts getting investigated by some, like, Social Security or something like that, you know, really, how would anybody know if nobody went looking for him, and there was no red flags, you know, on what the defendant in this case was doing? It's sad, but I think this actually happens more often than we realize.
Right. No, and again, like, I mean, there's so many examples that we can bring up of cases like this, which is just terrifying to think about. But also, I think of the neighbors too, where it's like, I mean, I think of my neighbors, and I don't know all of them, and you could tell me that something was happening in their house, and it's like, see something, say something, but it's like, at what point would you ever expect anybody would actually do this? And we'll see, you know, how these charges play out. There's a big question at this point about the woman who died. How did she die? They said it seemed like she had been malnourished in some capacity, so that could impact the charges. But at this point, he's facing $150,000 bond. And I know each state is different when it comes to bonds, but he's facing 16 pretty serious charges. What does that amount of bond, I mean, how do you read into bond amounts and what that means for the allegations as we're kind of waiting for more information to come out?
Yeah, every state is different in how their bail and bond statute is set up. Like, for example, Utah got rid of monetary bail for the most part, so they either hold you with no bail or release you, which is worse, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But $150,000 bail really is not is not a high bail in terms of somebody being able to bail out. I mean, if it's bondable, you get a bail bondsman, you pay 10% of that, right? And you can be released on bail. I think $150,000 is probably significant enough to secure someone coming back to court, so they're not on the hook for $150,000, right? But it's not, it's not the like $1 million bails that we see, in some of the, or $2 million and whatever it is in some of these murder cases. I think what courts look at in setting bail or bond amounts is, are there ways that we can supervise this person if they post bail? Or are they so dangerous that we need to keep them locked up and not release them pending trial? And what's a significant or significant enough amount to secure that someone is going to show back up in court? And so I think $150,000 is reasonable. But I also think it probably also, I mean, these are serious charges. But I don't think the state is so concerned that he's a public safety risk that they didn't propose a bond that was attainable. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I'm not sure about his financial situation. I mean, I believe it's a public defender who's representing him. So if you're thinking like $1,500, would that be to get out? But there's just so many questions I have about this case. Law enforcement, they've only released so much. We'll see what happens. I know the state attorney general in South Carolina is involved in this, so we'll see how this case moves forward. Sky Lazaro, criminal defense attorney. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.